I'm actually recording the session, so for anybody that misses anything during the session, it will be available afterwards. I'll upload it to the 32GI YouTube site, and you can always go and review it afterwards as well. If there are any questions, you're welcome to flag the questions through the panel, and we will answer all those questions a little bit later on. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about, and I'm not going to spend a long time doing it because I would prefer it to be more of an open session, and we did this with comrades as well, and we had a lot of questions to answer, is I just want to talk about a nutrition strategy when it comes towards the big day. A lot of people spend a lot of time specifically gearing up for a particular race, not necessarily racing each weekend, but sometimes they put a lot of effort into maybe 1 or 2 races through the year, and to those people it's quite important, and you obviously want to make sure that you get to that race in the best possible condition. So the race week nutrition I'll definitely talk about. That's the days leading up to the race and the week leading up to the race. I know a lot of people that have ruined their races by actually incorrectly taking in the proper food or even fluid during that week. Then 2 days prior to the race is quite critical, and then the day before, and then obviously on race day we'll talk about what you should be eating as a pre-race meal, and also obviously what you should be doing during the race. And like I mentioned before, 94.7 can be a 2.5-hour race for some people and a 4.5 to 5-hour ride for others. So it will vary depending on the kind of person you are. So the week before Cycle Challenge is always a critical week. Training time is over. You're in a complete taper period, meaning obviously reduced training, and you're going to maximize rest and recovery. There's only one thing you can really focus on, and that is obviously nutrition, eating correctly. Things to avoid in the week leading up to Cycle Challenge Sunday. I'd like to try and suggest to people to try and avoid refined carbohydrates, all those lovely things such as pizzas, pastas, and rice, etc. It's really not a necessity. A lot of people overeat carbohydrates in the week leading up to an event, actually end up gaining weight, and then they'll end up on race day actually pedaling at a much heavier weight than they were used to in training, and it's quite a sufferfest. Things like fried foods, heavy sugar-laden foods, alcohol, etc. All these kinds of things should probably be avoided. Alcohol specifically, it does impact performance, and I would say that 48 hours before an event you should try and avoid it completely. What you should focus on eating, and these are just some examples, are things like quinoa, amaranth, oats, sweet potatoes. These are carbohydrates that are actually quite decent for you. Definitely look at eating the healthy fats such as flax seeds, avocado, salmon, coconut oil was one of my favorites. Focus on eating things like nuts, seeds, walnuts, chia. All of these are very good proteins and fats. Fruits and vegetables. I would say the higher percentage should be vegetables. I tend to reduce fruits in the week leading up to an event because I definitely reduce my sugar intake. So I don't have more than a fruit a day, and sometimes no fruit at all. When it comes to dairy, I often talk to my clients and I actually ask them, are you actually dairy intolerant? And a lot of people are, yet they're addicted to chocolate milk or whatever it is, or yogurts, and they tend to not be able to avoid it because they just love it. And sometimes if something does impact you negatively, it's worthwhile avoiding it, especially in the week leading up to a race. Dairy definitely impacts, in a lot of people, things like the nasal passages. It creates more mucus. It can lead to infection or something. And the last thing you want to do is get sick before an event. I've got a lot of customers actually that are lactose intolerant, and they tend to consume dairy the morning of an event, and it's really not good on the digestive system. So if you are lactose intolerant, definitely avoid it. If you're 100% sure that you're not lactose intolerant, then I would say that it's fine. Another thing is hydration, and this is something that's very critical. When you come into an event, whatever the event is, any endurance event, you should actually come into that event being 100% hydrated. And by I mean 100% hydrated, meaning that the muscle uptake of that fluid is complete. In other words, your muscles have got the maximum amount of fluid inside of them before you start an event. If you're slightly dehydrated and it is a hot day, chances are you could be at a disadvantage because you could lose a lot more fluid, and then your body would would not actually react kindly to that. I recommend taking in approximately 40 milliliters of water per kilogram of body weight, and that does not mean coffee and green teas, etc., because those are diuretics. So you actually end up losing a little bit of liquid when you do drink coffee because because of the diuretic effect. So what I would recommend is that if you have a cup of coffee, add another 2 cups of water in for every cup of coffee you have. I've got a customer who actually has somewhere in the region of 4 cups of coffee a day, so I told him, well, that means an extra 2 liters of water over and above the fluid intake that he has to take in a day. In other words, reduce that caffeine intake the week leading up to an event. Just a little trick that I always tell some of the endurance athletes is that if you are caffeine intolerant, in other words, you stop drinking any caffeine or coffee probably 7 to 10 days before an event, and you make yourself slightly caffeine intolerant, what's quite nice is you can have 2 strong cups of coffee, for example, the morning of the event. It frees up a lot of free fatty acids, and it actually provides you quite a bit of an advantage because those can be utilized as a form of energy. It's just a little trick that a lot of the sort of the long endurance athletes actually utilize for events that go even up to 6, 7, 8 hours, such as Ironman or ultra distance marathons, etc. And it definitely does work. In the 2 days leading up to the race, from a nutritional point of view, you need to ensure you're eating and hydrating consistently. Definitely you're not skipping meals. I would avoid heavy red meats. They take a long time to digest, and the problem is that sometimes those meats are sitting in your system. They can leave you feeling lethargic on the day, and I always tell somebody, if you eat a big piece of red meat the night before, there's no ways it's not going to be out. It's not ways it's going to be out of your system by the time you race. You will be racing with that piece of meat in your system. Not very easy when you're performing at a slightly higher intensity and your digestive system is trying to break down something that's a little bit heavy. So I would stick to easily digested proteins and things that are a lot more easy on the stomach, on the digestive system, that make you feel a lot more comfortable. If you do have a higher carbohydrate diet, I know a lot of people carbo load the night before an event and they go and eat a whopping load of pasta. It really doesn't play much of a benefit. In all honesty, because you've been in a taper period in the week leading up to the event, your glycogen levels are going to be topped up anyway because you've reduced your volume of training. You're not going to be eating into your glycogen, and you will be topping it up if you eat normally. So don't overeat the night before. It's the last thing you want. You want to keep yourself quite comfortable, and one of the most important factors the night before an event is actually to focus on sleep. You don't want to land up not sleeping at night. I know that pre-race nerves affect people, and if you're overeating and you're lying in bed with a full stomach, you're going to battle to fall asleep. Something that is quite easy on the stomach, something that I always do, is eat something simple like a vegetable omelette or on toast, or scrambled eggs on toast, or a chicken salad or something like that. There's no need to overdo it, and you don't need a big portion and the day or the night before an event. In actual fact, the key meal is actually the morning of the event, and that's the pre-race meal, and that's exactly what you should be focused on. So on the race day, the morning of any race is critical in terms of nutrition, because the food that you actually take in before a race will actually become available during the race at a later stage. And what I suggest is taking in a meal that doesn't spike your blood glucose levels. You don't want to start that roller coaster effect before a ride. You want to try and have a bit of stability and balance. I would aim for a meal that's probably around 300 calories in total. Make it a meal that's a complete meal, carbohydrate, protein, and some fat. I've put some examples there of meals that you could eat, such as rolled oats. I actually cook my rolled oats in coconut oil, add peanut or almond butter and half a banana. Things like low GI bread, such as rye, oats or seed loaf, and then you can actually also put some peanut butter, almonds, and banana on top. I do have some pro cyclists. One specific cyclist that loves Nutella on her whole wheat or low GI bread before a race. It works for her, and she does that. She also adds banana on top of that for those that can stomach something like that. Also things like a low GI cereal or porridge with some fruit. The guys from BMC Westvaal, I think Westvaal BMC will tell you that they are sponsored by Future Life as well, so I think they would probably go with a Future Life cereal in the morning, which is fine. It is low GI, it has got protein, and I think it's an awesome pre-race meal. Things like sweet potato, brown rice, quinoa, not that they're great for the morning, but there are some people that eat it, and some people mix it with yogurt, banana, honey, etc. But try and make it something substantial, and this needs to be also a couple of hours before the race. In other words, you're not going to eat a meal like this an hour before the race. This is going to be probably about 3 hours before, because you still got to eat, get to the actual event, and then it takes time actually before the start. One of the things that I want to mention is, obviously, if you've got a 5:30 start, it's a completely different ball game. Those guys get up very, very early in the morning, quick snack, etc., and they go. But there are some people who are going to wait many hours before the start of the event. If you eat breakfast at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and your start is only at 9 o'clock in the morning, that is a very long time to wait before the start. You definitely have to eat in between. And I would say you should be snacking on something completely up until probably 45 minutes, 30 to 45 minutes before the start of the race, because you are burning off calories, okay, and you just want to keep yourself topped up. You want to just keep those energy levels topped up. So don't leave yourself for a couple of hours not consuming anything. One of the other things is that you don't want to overconsume on the liquid side, because it does cause the bladder to grow, and it causes a lot of discomfort, and if the weather's cold, it's even worse. So try and manage that fluid intake by having sips on something that's manageable and that doesn't cause an overload on the bladder. So I've actually mentioned this before. Do not overdrink, because it causes bladder overload. Do not overeat either, because it causes digestive discomfort. And remember, when you start pedaling, you're taking the blood away from the digestive tracts, you're putting it into the muscles. If your stomach is overloaded with food, you are going to suffer from digestive distress. And I mean, that's a fact. So rather keep the food on the stomach as small and as comfortable as possible. Definitely don't overload it. There's no reason to actually overeat. We've all got natural energy stores, and I can promise you that with what you've eaten the morning of the race, and if you didn't take in anything, you would probably easily have 2 to 2.5 hours worth of energy stored within you, and you won't need to stress about that at all. One of the things that I just want to stress as well is that some companies advocate consuming a gel immediately at the onset of an event. And I've got a slight problem with this, because what you're actually doing is you're spiking your blood sugar levels immediately at the onset. Not everybody is an elite athlete, or not everybody goes extremely hard out at a high intensity and tries to hold that pace for as long as possible. Even in the professional peloton, and I think Dylan and Sean will touch on this, what actually happens is that the guys that are sitting in the actual group are actually able to pace themselves. The only guys that are really pushing hard are the guys that are either trying to break away or on the front, and those are the guys that are really pushing at a high intensity. The guys that are sitting back in there can actually pace themselves, and if you're pacing yourself quite nicely, there's actually no reason to go and overload yourself with glucose. It can cause GI distress, especially if the body's not taking that glucose up. And the other thing is, when you do consume a gel, you know you need to consume roughly about 250 to 280 milliliters of water with it in order to be able to dilute it properly. If it's a cold day and you consume a gel and you don't dilute it properly with water, you can land up with GI distress, which is an overload of sugar in the gut, and it really is not a pleasant feeling. It can lead to severe stomach cramps. And it is quite a common athlete mistake. I've seen it happen quite often. Rather save those glucose spiking products towards the end. You know that they're more needed towards the end of the event, and they'll probably benefit you a lot later on than sooner. So how should you feel during the race? And this is something that a lot of people get wrong. Firstly, you need to understand how long, and realistically, you've got to decide how long are you going to take in this race. Are you going to go sub 2.5 hours? Are you going to go for under 3 hours? Is it going to be a 4 or 5 hours? Is it going to be a race, or is it just going to be a ride? And these are things that you need to know before you actually get in there. So if you're looking at short racing, which I would say is probably roughly between 2 to 3 hours, it's a much higher intensity of racing. So what happens when it's a high intensity of racing, the feeding time is usually a little bit few in between, and it's harder to control because the pace is quite high. The bunches are usually quite tight, and it makes it a little bit harder to feed. You've got to find those areas where you have got the ability to feed. It's not so simple. So in a race like this, if you are feeding from a bottle, which makes a little bit more sense because it's very hard to open up packaging, etc., while you're actually on the go and the pace is quite high, then bottles obviously contain fluid. And you need to be very careful, because if it's a cold day and you're relying on calories from a bottle, you might not drink as much. But if it's a hot day, you're actually fine. But if you are relying on calories in a bottle, you just need to be careful to make sure that every time you sip, you are going to consume the amount of calories that's required, let's say per an hour during the race. One of the things that I do personally, and I've put the slide up for you here, is I always say separate your hydration and energy requirements. It's the best idea you can possibly do. I always tell people, drink to thirst. Don't drink for calorie intake, drink to thirst. When your body's lacking fluid, it will trigger your thirst mechanism, and that's how you know you need to drink. You don't need to drink so much liquid per hour. Everybody's different. The thirst mechanism is actually extremely accurate. So what I suggest is just drink to thirst. What I've done, I've actually put a picture here of a bottle where I've made a concentrate of actually fluid. So I took our sort of one of our powdered carbohydrate drinks. I made a very, very heavy concentrate, and I know that per an hour I need to have each layer of those. So 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour, 4 hours. So I would sip from the one, make sure I took in that amount of calories per an hour, and then from the other bottle I would just drink to thirst to make sure that that was my hydration. It's just an idea. A lot of athletes do this during long endurance events, but it just makes it more easily manageable, and it's something that you can measure as well, which is quite nice. So you know exactly how much you are consuming if you are taking from the bottle, because a bottle's not so accurate. So that's just an example. So just be careful when it comes to consuming calories in the form of liquid. The big mystery, and I like to talk about this as well, is there's a lot. Science has shown that you should try and consume between 60 to 90 grams of carbohydrates per an hour. But I just want to stress, it's all very well and wonderful trying to consume 60 to 90 grams of carbohydrates per an hour. But it's definitely not about the amount of carbohydrates that you take in, because it's very easy to go and put 60 to 90 grams of carbs in your mouth. The actual problem is how much is your body capable of absorbing and utilizing. And if you're putting 60 to 90 grams of carbs into your body, and your body is not able to break that 60 to 90 grams down and utilize it, you are going to land yourself up in trouble. So firstly, you never try this in a race. You try this before a race, you try this in training, and you see what amount of carbohydrate intake is comfortable for your body and suitable for the kind of performance that you're going to put in training. And once you've done it in training, you can actually take that and put it into a racing context. And what I suggest to people, and you've got time until 94.7, you've got quite a bit of time, go on a hard 3-hour ride. Not at race pace, but maybe 10% lower than race pace. A fairly hard 3-hour ride. Take in the amount of carbohydrates that you are planning on taking in per an hour and see if it works for you or not. I know that in endurance events, personally, I get away with 30 to 40 grams of a carbohydrate in an hour. I can't go 60 to 90. My stomach just doesn't handle it. Another thing is that I pace myself. I've got a lot more controlled pace. I tend to go more for a fat burn than, at a higher intensity than more for glycogen burn. I'm more fat efficient, but some people are very carbohydrate dependent, so they might go and need to take in a higher amount of carbohydrates. Just make sure that the blend is suitable, that you can absorb that amount. Now, if you are going to look at 60 to 90 grams, obviously you would look at taking in something which is a multi-transporter carbohydrate drink. Our endurance is not designed to take in, say, 60 to 90 grams of carbs per an hour. It's a bit of a slower release drink. It provides more stability. It does break down into two carbohydrates in the system, into glucose and fructose, and it does release over quite a long period of time, and it's quite a stability carb. But if you're looking for a multi-transporter carbohydrate drink, something that's very quick releasing and that is maximized for maximum absorption, it's designed for maximum absorption, Accelerate would be a more suitable drink. But there's many people that can't handle that amount of carbohydrates in the system, so you definitely do need to experiment with it and see what works for you. There's definitely there's no choice there. So that's for the short riders. What about for those that are going to take, say, 3 to 6 hours, a bit longer? And in the case of the rider's going a lot longer, and he's not racing against the clock, he's probably going at a more of a comfortable pace. I think the key principles here are to your bottles are for hydration, and you should try and take in, probably rely more on food solids than anything else. So I don't mind whether you take bananas or sandwiches, or if you're taking 32 GR chews or our food bar. Also, a lot of people tend to eat too infrequently. In other words, they'll snack on something every hour. I would recommend trying to shorten that feed. The more frequently you feed, and the smaller the feeds, the more balanced your energy levels, and also the easier it is on the digestive system. So personally, I advocate things like 20 to 30-minute feeds. When I'm doing a race, I'll tend to consume, let's say we've got our chews, it's got 4 blocks in a packet. What I'll do is I'll eat a block every 20 to 30 minutes. I find that it's just easier on the system. I don't have to take in so much at once, and it's actually a lot easier, but it definitely provides a lot more stability. The other thing is, you need to try and feed early on in the event. Don't wait until later on, especially if you're going to take 4 to 5 hours. You rather feed earlier on. Later, you might not feel like eating, but at that stage anyway, you've put food into your system and you should have enough or more than sufficient energy to get to the end. And at a later stage, you can rely more on maybe simple sugars and carbohydrates as you get closer to the finish line. Just on race day, I've just put some nutrition examples over here because some people have asked me, what do you do? And I've just said, so pre-race, a preload. So I generally like to have a serving or half a serving of Endure before a race because it releases for quite a few hours. So it does make me feel a bit stable. You can snack on things like bananas, potatoes, bars, or even the 32 GR chews before the race. I've got a lot of athletes that actually like to use our 32 GR Recover pre-race. It has got protein in, it has got carbohydrates in, and it does provide a lot of stability and sustainability. So there are a lot of athletes that like to use that pre-race. They tend to drink it maybe while they're waiting for the start of the race, etc., and it does work very well. From an hydration point of view, if you're looking at 32 GI, definitely Endure Accelerate depending on your requirements and what you're actually looking for. Like I mentioned earlier, once you're in a comfort zone, which is about 20 minutes to 30 minutes in, you should start to feed and then start to feed every so often. And I've just given an example there. You can take a bar and split it into 3 or 4 pieces. You can take the tablets and you can split it over a period of time. You can take whatever you want and split it, cut it up into different pieces to be able to give you a little bit more frequent feeding, and it'll be a little bit easier on the digestive system as well. So I get often asked the question about fat fueling versus carb fueling, and I think this is quite an interesting topic. So first let me explain to you that intensity will determine which fuel you use. If you are racing at a very, very high intensity, you cannot utilize your fat stores to fuel your muscles. And the reason being is that you require a fair amount of oxygen to be able to process fat into fuel, which is ATP, which basically fuels the muscles. And if you're puffing and panting, you basically can't even breathe and get oxygen in, well, you're definitely not getting enough oxygen in to process fat. So it's very much intensity determined. However, there are times in an event where you are not going at such a high intensity and you have got the ability to utilize your fat stores. I would say that that's more in controlled endurance events where you, first of all, not racing at a high intensity against somebody else. So if you're looking at an Ironman or if you're looking at an ultra marathon, etc., you're running at a pace which is controlled and it's obviously at a comfortable pace. If you are racing in a peloton where there's acceleration all the time and constantly and the intensity is very high, you'll use a portion of fat and you'll use a portion of glycogen. But obviously, if it's very high intensity, most of the time we'll be using glycogen and fat. And it depends really on the intensity, which is going to be more the predominant form of fuel. The one thing that you need to know, if you consume a glucose spiking product, so if you take in a gel, there's no ways you can utilize your fat stores because immediately you've got glucose in the bloodstream and the body will want to utilize it first. It's not going to go to fat. Even if you're going at a low intensity, that glucose in your bloodstream is going to go first. So if you are determined and want to go and fuel on fat, you need to pace yourself. You need to make sure that you can go, and you need to try and stay away from the glucose spiking products and take in carbohydrates that don't spike you but provide you a bit more stability and don't give you that high incidence spike. But like I said again, if you're racing in a peloton and there is acceleration, you're really dependent on what's going to happen in the group. If you're sitting in the group and doing nothing and just pedaling, you're probably predominantly utilizing fat. But if it's acceleration all the time, you're definitely going to be chewing up a bit of glycogen. My fastest 94.7 is actually around 2 hours 20, and I only rode that on water. So it is possible to race in water. You don't have to actually overdo it. It really, really depends on the person. By the way, and I just wrote there at the slide, 1 gram of fat is 2 times more powerful than a gram of carbs, and that's a fact. I always tell people, if you ever see fat falling into the fire of a braai, it actually bursts into flames. And you can picture that happening in your body. Fat is a very powerful form of fuel if it can be harnessed. Okay, so I've got questions, but before we even go to questions, I'm actually going to bring our pro athletes into the mix, and I'm just going to bring Dylan in. Dylan, I'm going to unmute you. I just want to see if you're there. Can you hear me, Dylan?
Yeah, Mark.
Okay, so first of all, thanks very much for coming on board. I'm sure you've heard what I've said, and I don't know if anything relates to what you guys do, or maybe you guys do something quite differently. But if you can maybe tell the guys like how you prep for a race when it comes to maybe the day before, what you would eat the night before, the morning of, and during the race, that would be fantastic. At least it would be good knowledge to share.
Yeah, firstly, hi everybody. Thanks for having us here, Mark. I've been watching everything that you've been saying, and it's spot on. I couldn't disagree with anything that you said. The way we do pre-race is almost exactly what you've said. We have, however, on that part with the meats, the red meats before races. To give you an example, Clover Tour, which is a 5-day tour that we did, the one tour that I won this year, we actually had red meat and wine every single night, and it seemed to work quite well. Obviously, with a tour, it's longer, it's not quite as intense all the time, so maybe that was a better thing because of the higher protein intake, so making you last a bit longer. Because obviously in a tour you're not starting every stage flat box, and I think that's maybe why the steaks were a good idea there. I don't know what you would think about that, if that's any truth in there.
I think it depends on the person. It really depends on the person. Meat doesn't gel well with me, but for some people it's actually perfect. I just tend to tell people, if they haven't tried and tested it, then try to avoid it. Don't try something new the night before the race.
Don't try it not before the race, yeah, sure. Because we actually all tried it every night, every single one of us, and we all went well. So that was quite funny. But otherwise, on the normal day-to-day basis, obviously try and watch our sugar intake. I mean, I do like my sweets, and recently, probably in the last 3 or 4 months, I've switched to Coke Zero now, to try and take down my sugar intake, because I used to drink a lot of Coke, and I've got hooked on Coke Zero. So that's brought that sugar level down, and I try to cut the chocolates out where I can, because that does actually affect your body. I mean, sugar in your system actually causes acid, because the bacteria in your body feeds on the sugar and they excrete acid. That's why your teeth go flat if you chow sugars not just before you're going to sleep. The same thing happens, I think, in your stomach. So overall you're healthier with less sugar in your system. Obviously I'm talking about like sugar you get out of a pot, not sugar that you're getting out of a proper endurance drink like 32 GR. So cutting out sugars, I don't really carb load, to be honest. Pastas, yeah, maybe once a week. Coming up to an event, also maybe once a week. I don't really change anything that much when it comes to a big event. I'll rather focus, like you said, on sleep. If it's before a tour, then we would have a big meal the night before. But if it's before one day classic, then a normal meal that you would have at home on your every night. What you said there is 100%.
And how do you guys feed yourselves like during the race? I mean, obviously you've got seconding vehicles, etc. But how do you determine when you want to eat and when you guys want to drink? Do you go by feel or?
That's also a personal preference. Myself, I start off in the morning with my, like you said, Future Life, and I mix a bit of 32GI Recover in that. And that we try and eat about 2 hours before the race. So we time our wake up and everything quite well. If it's, for instance, a race like the Lost City and it's a 2-hour drive there and it starts at 6 o'clock, so you've got to get up at like 3:30 with the owls, and then drive that distance. I normally chow before I leave, and then I take a shake, which I have probably about 45 minutes to an hour before the race starts, like on the way there or just when you get there, just to top up the energy levels for later on in the race. Because the way that I personally race is I try and not do much in the beginning, because I normally start on quite a full stomach, and then my power sort of comes towards the end of the race, and then that's where I actually feel my best. I push out the best numbers on my power meter, etc. And then during the race, I take enough nutrition for the duration of the race. If it's 2 hours, one sachet of 32GI chews is enough. Longer than 2 hours, I sometimes take 1 or 2 bananas, depending on how long it's been since I've eaten before the start of the race. For me, bananas digest easily. They've got a good amount of carbs, not a hell of a lot. So if you're drinking your 32GI mix with, say, 40 grams of carbs, plus the extra 20 or whatever you're getting out of the banana, you're sort of borderlining on what you need. But like you also said, it differs for every person. I can't personally take too many carbs. I notice as soon as I take too many carbs, my stomach starts cramping, feel like I want to go to the toilet, and I just don't feel well. So like that's personal preference as well. It depends from person to person. I mean, I do know a lot of guys that do race on a hell of a lot of carbs. I know a guy that races on plain sugar water. He puts 150 grams of sugar in his bottle with plain water, and that's what he rides on. He doesn't take any food. I can't say I can agree on that. I don't know what you think about that.
Look, I mean, sugar. It just it digests and gets absorbed quite quickly. But I think the point of the matter is that it doesn't provide any stability, and that's the problem with just a simple sugar. There's no stability in it, so it's really a roller coaster ride. And the frequency of his feeds would have to be quite close together. He wouldn't be able to go for too long without sipping on his bottle, especially if he's going at a very, very high intensity and he's racing for, say, 3 to 4 hours. Like I said, for 2 hours you really don't need much, but as you go longer and the intensity is quite high, you definitely need some more stability and you need a quicker feed.
Yes.
And then, okay.
Yeah, so during the race, I just feed myself on duration. You said also feeding in like 20-30 minute intervals, which is 100% correct when it comes to eating small things such as chews. I normally open a packet of chews in the beginning, like even before I start, I tear the packet open so they're easy to get to in my pocket and I don't even have to take the packet out. Just grab a chew, chow it, and then also about every 20-30 minutes a chow chew. If I really need a boost towards the end of the race, I would use the energy tabs because they, for me, give a hell of a kick. I mean, it's way more than any goo or any sort of energy gel that I've ever used. And it doesn't make you bonk either, which is something that I've suffered with other products. For longer races, like say I chow the bananas, eat 1 an hour, and then towards the end, mix in some chews, and then right at the end, some energy tabs. After the race, straight away, take a recovery. We've also got a 1 hour recovery window to utilize for taking in carbs and your recovery shake. Do that every time I ride longer than, say, 2.5 hours. So for training, if it's 2 hours, I don't really bother, because I don't think it's necessary for a 2-hour ride. But anything longer than that, I'll definitely take a recover.
I mean, not related to 94.7, but when you guys do like stage races and that, how critical is your recovery from day to day? Because I think that's the most important thing. You need to recover for the next stage.
Yeah, that's actually the most important thing if you're aiming on doing a good result for the tour overall. Like eating and eating and eating is key. Obviously, you don't want to eat too much just before the start, but I mean, as soon as, for instance, at Clover to as soon as you finish the stage, you get in that recover, you get in food as quickly as possible, and then maybe even a endurance 32-hour endure, like also directly after the stage, just to get your water levels up, your hydration up, and then getting off your feet, kicking back, staying off your feet completely for the rest of the day. Keep on adding in food. Never feel hungry. That's actually another thing on the bike. If you're hungry on the bike, it's too late. If you're thirsty on the bike, it's too late. I drink when I'm sort of feeling, okay, my mouth's getting a bit dry, I think I need to drink now. But when it comes to food, if you're feeling hungry on the bike, it's too late because your body's going to crash. That's just my feeling. I don't know if you can agree with that.
No, I definitely agree with you. That's why I say you should try and eat a little bit more frequently and less to try and keep that balance and that stability. The other thing is you mentioned as your mouth feels some dryness is to try and actually drink. I think that's quite an important point because a lot of people, when they feel that dryness, they actually tend to wait. But you've got to understand that dryness, that immediate onset, that's your trigger, that's your thirst mechanism saying take in fluid. And now's the time to actually take it in. One of the problems, though, that I do know is that if you take in a drink which is high in sodium, and there's a lot of drinks on the market that are high in sodium, it will make you thirsty. It will trigger your thirst because the reason that your thirst mechanism triggers is because sweat is actually hypertonic. So when you're losing fluid from the body, what's quite interesting is that your sodium levels become more concentrated. So when I say hypertonic, you're losing more liquid than you are sodium. And that sodium is that taste that you're getting in your mouth. And that's exactly why your body's saying, take in liquid, I need to dilute. I'm becoming too sodium concentrated. The problem is if a drink is too high in sodium, the guys tend to drink, and it actually is doing the reverse. It's forcing you to drink. And this comes from the very, very old days where they decided to add so much sodium to the drinks because they were worried that people would dehydrate. So they wanted to force them to drink more liquid. But we know that dehydration is not really something that you need to worry about. It's actually more overhydration. Most athletes are dehydrated and they still perform very, very well. But if you manage your fluid intake, pretty sporadically and just drink to thirst, you should actually be 100%. There won't be any issues at all. So I think another question I wanted to ask you is the guys in your team. What's their take around carbo loading? I mean, I've got my opinion, but I'd be interested to hear if you guys are into carbo loading or it was something that now you've moved away from it, etc. So in the days leading up to an event, do you really focus on maximizing your carbohydrate intake? I'd be interested to hear.
To be honest, I don't like really carbo load that much. I don't know if it's just pastas. I don't know. Pasta for me is a bit bland at times. It's something that I struggle to get down if I'm taking in too much of it. But for a one-day classic, I don't think. For us, it's, I suppose, different. Because, I mean, we're racing 100K races in 2.5 hours. You don't really need that many carbs. But if we're on the bike for 5-6 hours, then I think it would be really important. I'm sure the same rule applies to a recreational rider who's riding 6 hours versus us who are doing 180, 200K stage and riding 6 hours. I'm sure the same rule applies. So yes, if we have got a seriously long race, then carbo loading would be ideal. Like for instance, we're doing tour of Rwanda at the end of the year with the national team, and I've done that tour now 2 years in a row. This will be the 3rd consecutive year. And that's something that I would carbo load for. I mean, that's something like as soon as we land in Rwanda, I'll start getting in the pasta, the rice, things like that.
Okay, look, yeah, so I suppose in a longer event, you need to, you want to spare as much glycogen as possible, and you want to obviously have your glycogen levels really, really topped up because, obviously the longer you ride and the harder you ride, the chances are you're going to deplete your stores regardless. And that's just something I actually wanted to mention. By the way, if you're racing at a very high intensity, let's say for 3, 4, 5 hours and you're going quite hard, it will get to a stage in that event where glycogen levels are depleted, and a lot of the guys hit the wall, and eventually your liver glycogen comes into play, and it's not a pleasant place to be. And your brain actually forces your body to slow down so that you can actually utilize fat as a form of energy. So everybody goes through that. I think I've probably bonked about 50 times in my life just testing product as well, But the thing is that the more you train on minimalistic fueling and you try to become more efficient. So, if I go for a 2 to 3 hour ride, actually I'm up to 6 hours now where I actually only drink water, but that's obviously the very low intensity ride. I've made myself very, very fat efficient over the years. And what actually happens is that that switch from glycogen to fat is actually, you actually don't really feel it. If you've trained your body, you don't actually feel it as bad as somebody that is so carbohydrate dependent that when that switch happens, it really, really hits them hard. But you can feel glycogen levels when you're going at a very high intensity, only up to a certain percentage, by the way, but eventually at some stage they will deplete. It just depends on how long and how hard you're going for. It doesn't matter how many carbohydrates you take in. At some stage, it does extend that glycogen level depletion, but at some stage they are going to deplete. Have you ever felt that, Dylan? At some stage in the race where you've just been going too hard after a couple of hours and there's just no stopping it. You're going to crash at some stage.
Yeah, it's the infamous bonk. Every cyclist will have it. If they haven't had it, they definitely will get it. It's something that experience teaches you to avoid. It's really hard to carry on pushing yourself when you're hitting the wall. You get the shakes and sometimes your eyes even go squint. Like I've had times where I've seen 2 lines on that road. There's not much you can do other than slow down and try and get your blood sugars leveled out again. But yeah, it's not a pleasant place to be, and it will definitely, if your competitor's not bonking and you're going to lose against him. Simple as that.
I just wanted to, if there's any questions that you guys have, you're welcome to ask us. I can't see any questions actually online at the moment. But if any of you have got any questions, you can just raise your hand. I can even unmute you, and you guys can ask a question online, or you can type a question, and we can answer with pleasure. There's any? Okay, so I can see there is a question there. So just hold on a second. I'll try and unmute this guy. See if he can. I don't know if he's got a microphone or not. Rowan, are you there?
Mark, I'm here.
How's it? No, I just saw you've got a question.
Yes, Mark. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, what to eat a pre-race as opposed to a pre-training. It's because, when you're racing, your intensity is a lot higher as opposed to when you are like training.
Okay, so I'll answer, and then I'll ask Dylan also to give his opinion. So, look, to be honest, when I'm training, because I want to make myself as fat efficient as possible and not have to be carbohydrate dependent. And another thing is I also focus on obviously keeping my lean muscle mass to a certain extent, and obviously I want to manage my body fat, etc. I do not ever have a pre-training meal at all if I'm going on rides that are up to 2.5 hours, 3 hours. I really, especially if I get up very, very early in the morning and go for a ride, I'm not going to eat. I'll have a cup of green tea. I'll go out for 2.5, 3 hours. If it's 3 hours and it's a very high intensity, I might take some sort of a carbohydrate drink with me or something to eat on the drink. And then the focus will be recovery. The focus will definitely, you have to recover after something like that. However, if I'm going on a long, hard session, say about, if it's 4 or 5 hours, and this is something that I actually like to stress. You've got time till 94.7 now. I do something called a pre-race nutrition training session. And what I do is I try and mimic my race conditions. So when you're going to race, you need to know what you're going to eat, and you need to know how you're going to fuel yourself. You need to know what you're going to eat when you wake up in the morning. So what I do is I do it a few months before a race, and I experiment and I play with it, but you've still got time now. But I'll wake up on a morning and I'll say, okay, I'm going to eat a bowl of oats, and I'm going to eat it like this because this is what I'm going to do for the race. And then instead of going out at race pace, I'll go 3 hours, because let's say I'm going for 2.5 hours. So maybe I'll go 3 hours at 10% below race pace, so slower than race pace, and I will go out and I will fuel myself according to the way I'm going to feel in the race, and I will see how I feel when I'm finished. I do that once every 10 days or once every 2 weeks to make sure that I'm on track. So another thing is you have to train your gut for a race. You can't just decide, I don't have carbohydrates whatsoever, and then all of a sudden on the day you're going to have carbohydrates. You need to obviously feel what it's going to feel like. So I think that's quite critical, is actually teaching your body to understand on race day what you're going to do. And once you've got that nutrition program or regime bedded down, you need to stick to it. You need to stick to it on the day. Don't change it on the day. Stick to it. Don't listen to your friends, whatever. You definitely need to stick to it because that's what you've prepared yourself for, and you need to stick to it. So that's what I do.
Okay.
I just want Dylan. Can I ask Dylan to just give what he does there as far as that goes? I don't know.
Yeah, sure. 100%.
Hi. Yeah, what Mark said is definitely 100%. Don't change things at the last minute.
No, absolutely not.
What I do during training actually does differ a bit to what my racing is. I don't really ever carbo load before training. There'll be some nights when, because obviously I follow a training program, so I know what's coming up in the next few days. Monday, if I'm taking Monday off, I know Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday is going to be like really hard. But I don't have in the back of my mind, it's going to be so hard, I need to, carbo load for this training. Because we do it so often, it's just part of our normal eating.
It's like a routine almost.
Yeah, it is routine, you're right,
Yeah, Mark?
Yes.
I guess ask you, what about, for example, taking something like you have like a complex, a carbohydrate, a pre-race meal, as opposed to a low GI meal, for the reason that you are going to be using your glycogen stores a lot more during race conditions as opposed to training. It's because of the higher intensity. Normally, when I train, I will use the endurance fuel, and then when I am racing, I will also use the accelerate fuel, and then about half an hour before the race, I will start drinking a little bit of the accelerators to try and prepare myself for the first about 15-20 minutes, which is usually very quick and it's very intense.
So I just touched on that. Like I said, if you're going to start the race at a very high intensity, and I always tell this even to sprint distance triathletes, for example, if you're doing a sprint distance triathlon, you can pop a gel at the beginning of the race, or you can take something that will spike your blood sugar at the beginning of the race, because you are going to go out extremely hard. But if you're going to go out at a slower pace, at a controlled pace, and sit in the group and let the guys on the front do the work, and you're not going to be puffing and panting, etc., then there's no reason to spike your blood sugar, because what will happen is if you do spike your blood sugar and you do not flatten that spike with high intensity, it's going to land you up in a bit of a roller coaster effect. It's going to give you that up-down effect, and once that pendulum starts to swing, it's very difficult to come out of it. So I agree with you. If you're going to go 2.5 hours, and you guys go out hard. I mean, I've raced 94.7. It's hard. So and the feeding's quite infrequent. There's no issue with actually consuming a higher glucose feed at the start of the race. No problem at all whatsoever. But for the guys that are going slower, that's a different story.
Different story. Yeah, but then, like you say, for example, if I do take a gel or a few of the accelerate tabs at the start, or then I would obviously have to continue taking them at a regular interval to try and maintain quite the high blood sugar levels, so that my blood sugar levels don't start dropping, like you said.
Yeah, well, the thing is, once you start taking in a product that does spike your blood sugar levels, yeah, the feeds have
Yeah,
to come a little bit more frequently because
yeah, yeah,
you know you tend to do you do tend to drop. So you need to just
yeah,
monitor that. Um,
100%. Great.
okay,
Thank you.
so one of the I've just got another question here from one of the other guys whose mic's not working, and he's a marathon mountain biker, and he's just
Mm-hmm.
asking because he doesn't know what to expect from a road race, and you know, like from 94.7. So in this case, he actually has like a endurance, and he actually takes gels along with that. And
Mm-hmm.
he starts taking in the gels from about 2 hours in, every, say, 45
Mm-hmm.
minutes up to the finish. So, Christian, I'm answering your question. I think a mountain biking event is actually probably far less predictable than a race like this, unless obviously it can be. Look, a road race can be unpredictable depending on the group that you're racing in. But generally, like if you're racing 94.7 and you are going in like a licensed vets group, there's the bunch tends to be quite big and pretty stuck together, and it's quite a high pace from beginning to end. But it's not. The acceleration doesn't usually happen until later on. I mean, that's what I've experienced. I mean, the acceleration that I've experienced and I've raced 94.7 quite a few times, and Dylan can chat about his experience in the pro ranks. But I find the acceleration start to happen on the N14, which is a little bit later, where on the hills the guys start to accelerate quite frequently. I think the problem is that with mountain biking, is that usually they're quite technical, and what actually happens is that the landscape is unpredictable. So you might hit a hill or another hill or another hill, or sometimes the hills and the climbs are long, and the intensity is actually quite high. So I find with mountain biking events, also because it's quite technical, you don't actually always have the ability to feed when you want to, because sometimes you can't leave go those handlebars or you'll come falling off the bike. Whereas when you're racing on the road, it's a little bit more controlled, and you've got the ability to feed a lot more easily. So I think you've got more control in a road race than you have in a mountain bike event. Um, and again, it really depends on the time that you're trying to do this race in. You know, if you are going sub 3 hour, then I would recommend taking in where you can actually feed, like instead of feeding from hour 2 onwards, you can feed from like you would uh, from the beginning. You could feed like you did in the first 2 hours. In other words, drink and take your gels from the word go and through the entire race quite frequently. I think that's fine. But if you're going a lot longer, like 4 or 5 hours, then again you ease into it and hold off the gels maybe till later on, because your pace will be a lot slower. I think it really depends on the intensity you're going to go out at and the intensity you're going to perform at. And I think that's what Rowan actually touched on now. Dylan, I mean, your opinion, you've done obviously off-road and on-road. I mean, what would you say to that?
Yeah, I've done a few mountain bike races. From my experience with marathon and cross country, I actually have a higher intensity on the mountain bike than on the road. And like you said, it is definitely more difficult to feed on a mountain bike. I find it's easier to eat smaller food than a mountain bike because you can just quickly grab it in your pocket and shove it in your mouth. Where with road cycling, like I say, I try a banana or a 50-jar energy bar, and that you got to open up and get it down slowly. I don't think nutrition in your bottle needs to change. For me, it's the same. I use endurance or accelerate for both disciplines. Both seem to work fine. Then I have actually talking about the two different supplements, the accelerate and the endure. I, to be honest, prefer racing on endure. For shorter events like time trials and criteriums, which are half an hour to an hour flat out, and also cross-country races, accelerate is definitely the better one to use. I just find the endurance, it doesn't make me feel bad in the beginning, but it seems to carry me longer, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's got more. It definitely has got more sustainability, because the glucose is still releasing a couple of hours later when you actually still need it.
Yeah.
So I mean, we have got a lot of pro cyclists that say they're still. It's quite interesting to hear that up to 2 hours of time trial, short distance events, they'll go and accelerate, but anything longer, they always go with the Endure. And I hear that from some of the pro triathletes as well. They like the Endure on the half Ironman distance events and long. They just like that stability. You know, they like to feel stable and not have that up and down, which is quite interesting to hear from them.
Yeah.
I've got another question again from another cyclist. He enjoys eating nougat on the bike as opposed to gels. Does nougat give a major glucose spike like gels, or is it a bit more controlled? And do you need to consume as much fluid with nougat as you do the gel? So nougat is an interesting one. First of all, it depends on how the gel is created, whether it spikes you too much or not. Nougat is not just, it doesn't just give you a spark, because it's obviously got egg protein in, which is albumin, and basically it depends on how much protein there is to carbohydrate in the nougat. The only issue that that nougat could have on you would probably be it could cause digestive issues at some stage if it's overconsumed. And the other thing is that I don't necessarily understand how quickly that it gets absorbed. All it really is a simple sugar with albumin. There's no complex carbs, etc. It's quite a simple product. I wouldn't use it for ultra events. I would rather use it also for short distance events, etc. because it creates little short spikes and it's quite quickly absorbed into the system. I'll be honest with you, many years ago I also used to eat nougat, but you know, you've got to experiment and do what you're used to. I could work out the GI of the nougat if you gave me the breakdown of the packaging, etc. So, what's nice about the nougat as opposed to a gel, it's more of a food solid. So I think it does give you more substantial feed. In other words, it's something that you can eat as opposed to, and you feel a little bit fuller, maybe a little bit more comfortable in the stomach, whereas a gel, it's like a liquid that goes into your system, and there's a lot of people that don't actually enjoy it. So I don't know if that answers your question, David, but you know, if the nougat works for you, then stick to it. I don't think you would need to use as much, definitely not consume as much fluid with a nougat as you would with a gel, because a gel is a extremely high concentrate of glucose, a whopping load into your system at once, and especially if you're looking at something like multidextrin, etc. You know, a lot of people go with a 2-to-1 fructose glucose to fructose ratio, or multidextrin to fructose ratio. There's different takes depending on who the company is. It depends on how your body responds to that. I mentioned earlier on that it really depends on your stomach and the kind of absorption rate and what your system's used to. If you haven't got the ability to absorb and digest it, you're going to end up suffering. But if you've played with this kind of food in your training sessions and you're quite happy and comfortable with it, and you've tried it in high intensity sessions as well, then you know you stick with what works. I've got another question here. Around caffeine, and somebody's asking me what do I think of caffeine, and okay, so caffeine is a very interesting one. I mentioned earlier on in the presentation that caffeine does play a benefit. Look, there's two major benefits to caffeine. Number one is in an endurance event, like I said, if you're caffeine intolerant and you take caffeine before an endurance event, and I can tell you now, I mean, if you speak to any of the Tour de France cyclists, and I mean, there's a few that I know intimately that will tell you that they cut coffee out 30-40 days before the Tour de France starts. They cut completely caffeine out, and on the morning of each stage they actually drink in the coffee, and they take the caffeine in because it does play a benefit. The caffeine does play a benefit. It frees up more free fatty acids, and that's the one advantage. So it provides a form of energy to the system. The other thing is that, Dr. Alan Lim actually, who's quite well known from Scratch Labs, who was the Radio Shack sort of scientist, etc., and he worked with quite a few of the top cyclists. He's spoken about that quite intimately. Another benefit of caffeine is that it creates alertness. It does. It makes the brain wake up a little bit. So if you are feeling a little bit flat or fatigued and you pop in some caffeine, it makes you feel a little bit awake. But it's not really doing anything additional or extra to the muscles. But what it's doing is it's making the brain wake up, which actually sometimes impacts the ability to perform better. but that's a brain function. And we've seen that before. I mean, if you have a look at the famous experiment where people were asked to ingest a carbohydrate, and another group of cyclists was told not to ingest the carbohydrate, but to actually swish it around in their mouth and to spit it out, they found that both groups of cyclists, the one that actually swallowed the carb and the one that actually just tasted the carb, actually had the same sort of spark in performance improvement. And they actually nailed that down. Well, they haven't actually come to a complete conclusion as to exactly what it will do, but definitely the taste of the sugar, or the taste of the carbohydrate already got the brain to tell the body perform a bit better or up the performance, and they've seen that. So caffeine definitely does have the ability to do that. There are obviously different types of caffeines, and as one of the questions mentions here, some gels have 20 milligrams to some gels having 100 milligrams. So this is where the disadvantages of caffeine come into play. Caffeine, first of all, is very, very acidic. It creates acidity in the digestive tract. Okay, so number one, if you're taking too much caffeine, it's very possible that it can play on the digestive system because it creates a lot of acid. And that's a fact. Caffeine is acidic. The second thing is that caffeine acts as a diuretic. Caffeine can cause you to lose more water than you want to, and that's another issue that I've got. That's why I always tell people, if you're going to have the caffeine before an event, make sure it's 3 to 4 hours before. Don't have it like half an hour before, an hour before. It really does play with the system. And during an event, if you are going to have caffeine, pop it probably half an hour, 40 minutes before the finish. That way it will give you that benefit, and then, towards the end of the event, it's worn off, etc. 20 milligrams is not a lot of caffeine. I would go for before an event, 1 to 2 milligrams of caffeine per kilogram of body weight. If you want to look at the free fatty acid advantage, 100 milligrams, you've got to understand that's a lot. That's consuming. A Red Bull's got 80 milligrams, so that's even more than a Red Bull. So it's quite an excessive amount of caffeine. I don't know. I've never tried that, and I don't know what kind of impact it would have on my system. But I think personally, if I took that much caffeine in an event, I think it would actually probably impact my system quite negatively. Now, I don't drink a lot of caffeine, so I'm more caffeine intolerant. But maybe somebody who has 3, 4, 5 cups of coffee a day and then takes in 100 milligram caffeine in an event, it wouldn't impact him as much, and it would probably wake him up only just a little bit. Somebody who's not caffeine intolerant is not going to get a big benefit from caffeine, no matter what. They're not going to get a big benefit from caffeine. And that's just something else that I want to say. If you are used to drinking coffee constantly and you drink a couple of cups a day, etc., from a health point of view, you should reduce it. You shouldn't really have more than 6 to 7 cups a week. You should try and reduce it. I know it's very difficult because caffeine is definitely an addictive substance. But somebody that does drink coffee regularly or consumes caffeine regularly, don't try and stop taking in the caffeine all of a sudden the week before the event, because the worst thing now is that you get withdrawal symptoms leading up to the race, and it makes you feel ill and terrible, etc. And that's not the kind of position you want to be in either. So if you are going to taper down your caffeine intake, rather do it quite a bit before, and don't just do it at the last minute. Dylan, do you guys actually play with caffeine at all during events, before events, coffee, etc.?
Yeah, I've been wanting to comment on this because caffeine intake is a big thing in the professional peloton. A lot of guys swear by it, especially the old school guys, the sort of 27, 28-year-olds who are now fading out of the pro peloton. I think that was a phase that a lot of the pros went through a few years back, that they thought you take caffeine, you're going to go fast. I mean, the Oaks, I know, ride with caffeine pills actually in their bib shorts. They just wrap the little pill up in a plastic, and then they pop the caffeine pill. I tried it a few times, and to be honest, it just shoots me straight down to the ground. I don't know what's going on. I start shaking, almost like a bonking feeling. Try and go hard, heart rate's going up and down. It doesn't work for me, and I know it doesn't work for some people. So maybe it's another thing that would be different for everybody. Like I say, there's guys that swear by it, who can't race a race without it. But there are guys such as myself who I really can't have it during the race, not as a supplement. Taking a Coke maybe towards the end of the race, I don't know whether it's the caffeine that's helping or the spike in sugar levels. That seems to help me a bit. I like a Coke in some races towards the end, especially if I'm feeling really flat. Regarding to coffee, I think you're going to get some hate mail from these people saying that they mustn't drink coffee because cycling and coffee are sort of.
I didn't say don't drink it. I said reduce it. I've got an. Carry on.
Most avid cyclists own a coffee machine in their house and probably like 2 or 3 coffees a day. I'm pretty sure. But I mean, I drink coffee every single day, at least one. I don't overdo it, like more than 2 or 3. But for me, having a coffee with my cereal, yeah, I can't think of not doing it. I don't know if it helps with getting my stomach going in the morning, because I don't know if nature calls after your coffee, whether you've had breakfast or not. Or maybe it's just become a habit. I don't know. But yeah, coffee, I've actually heard, accelerates your recovery afterwards. I don't know if you know anything about that. I've been told.
Yeah, I was going to talk about that now.
Yeah.
So
straight off the run.
So one of the things that I did want to mention, another benefit of caffeine, it's not necessarily coffee, but coffee does go down nicely after an event. If you do deplete your glycogen levels during an event by taking in caffeine with a complex carbohydrate, you can speed up the glycogen replenishment by even up to 60% faster by taking in caffeine. So what I generally recommend immediately after a very hard session is taking your protein carb recovery shake immediately afterwards to stabilize your blood sugar, get the protein into your system, start to get those muscles resynthesized. But when you do have your recovery meal afterwards, I generally like to have definitely like a rolled oats or something. I throw almond butter in and a whole lot of stuff, which I won't go into right now. But I love like at least a really strong cup of proper like 100% Arabica filtered coffee with it, and it really does work. It definitely does help with glycogen replenishment. There's no doubt. So it does help with recovery. No, you spot on there. I was actually going to mention that.
Yeah, I think it also ups your mental state as well. I mean, I don't know. For me, if I have a nice cup of coffee, it just puts me in a better space. I don't know. It just makes me feel better after a ride. Been riding for 4 hours in the rain, and you come and have a nice warm coffee with your recovery meal. It just I don't know how I can say it. It just improves your mood. So I don't know if that helps recovery at all.
No, look, it does. It wakes you up a little bit, and after a hard session, I think that you definitely look. It goes down well. I've got to admit myself. Look, I only drink about 4 to 5 cups of coffee a week at the most. Believe me, I used to drink a lot more. I do it just personally for just health reasons. But the bulk of my coffee will come post-workout, without a doubt, or pre-endurance race. But that's just me. It's something that I've played with and I've worked with. I've got another question here. Somebody mentioned that. I mentioned that training on taking in only water during a race or training ride. Not sure if pros don't have to contend as much with the issues of cramping, coping with the heat, etc. But should you then take something else if opting for only water? So I actually had a debate with one of my pro Ironman athletes, Liz Blatchford, who placed third at Kona in Hawaii recently. She's a 32 GI athlete, a phenomenal athlete, and this was her first year of Ironman. And it's funny, when she switched to Ironman, everybody said, you need to take in salt tablets, in order to try and prevent cramping. But if you do the research, the scientific research, and you actually speak to the likes of like Dr. Ross Tucker and Tim Noakes, etc., who have done a lot of research on hydration. I've read Tim Noakes' book called Waterlogged quite intimately. It's interestingly enough, you do not actually have to take in anything with the water for your body to hydrate properly. In other words, the cramping doesn't come from what you're consuming from a nutrient point of view. I'll tell you this now. Cramping, is generally caused not by electrolyte depletion, but generally caused by an overused muscle. And I'll tell you the difference. I had an enduro motor or off-road cyclist, enduro or motocross, a guy who participates in the Roof of Africa. In actual fact, he's participated actually in the Paris-Dakar, which is now held in Chile, also twice. And I was busy chatting to him because he was busy testing our product for Paris-Dakar, and he was telling me that he needed to add a little bit of salt to the solution. He just needed a little bit of salt to the solution. The reason being is that he felt that he was cramping. And when I had a discussion with him around the cramping, I said to him, where is the cramping? Is it localized? Like, is it just in your legs? Is it just in your feet? Is it just, where is the cramping happening? And the cramping for him was every single muscle in his body. His hands, his arms, everywhere was cramping. That would point more to something that's probably electrolyte imbalance. Because remember, if you're losing sodium or if you're losing salt in your calf muscle, you're not going to just lose it in a focused area. You're going to lose it in every muscle in the body. It's basically everywhere. It's not just in one particular area. So if you're only cramping in the calf, or if you're only cramping in the quads, or etc., that is really an undertrained muscle. It means that the intensity that you're racing at, you haven't been doing, or you haven't trained that muscle sufficiently during training, and that's generally 99% of cramps are due to that. They really are due to that. If you cramp, it's generally due to an undertrained muscle. Very rarely do we find that cramping is caused by nutrition issues. There's another form of cramping which is obviously caused by overhydration, and that's diluting the electrolyte levels. Where people drink too much water and actually dilute the electrolyte levels. However, like I mentioned before, when you get to that stage, believe me, you'll feel it everywhere. Not only will you feel nauseous and dizzy, and you'll feel in a complete state of disorientation when you actually dilute your electrolyte levels. But cramping is definitely, it's 99% it's undertrained muscle. I don't know if you've got any theories on that, Dylan, but I mean, you know, I've had a lot of debate and discussion with the likes of like Dr. Ross Tucker and Tim Noakes, and you know, I can send you some links as well to, Ross has done some interesting research on marathon runners and ultramarathon runners at Two Oceans, and they did some testing as well with results. People, I think it was in the New York Marathon, testing, you know, by taking in a hydration drink with electrolytes and carbohydrates, to what kind of effect it actually impacts them over a period of time. And it was less than 1%. It was so negligible that they realized that salt actually doesn't do any benefit to the person as far as cramping goes. It tends to point more to undertrained muscle than anything else. One thing I can actually say, though, is if you do drink water on its own, the absorption rate is a certain amount of milliliters per an hour. If you add sugar to the water, of course, you'll be able to absorb more water, because the sugar actually helps the absorption process of the water. And that's so from a hydration point of view, obviously adding carbohydrate or salts to liquid will actually help you take in more liquid per an hour than, or help the body absorb more liquid per an hour than it would water just on its own. So that's something that yes, I would say that's the reason to add nutrients to the water, to be able to try and increase the amount of fluid absorption into the body. I don't know if there's anything else on that. Somebody's asked me about the benefits of beta-alanine. I don't use it personally, but it's quite big in the bodybuilding space. Also, it has been shown to increase muscle mass, and it's been shown scientifically as well to boost sort of strength and power output. There are some athletes that swear by it, and you know, because it's shown to improve anaerobic performance. But I suppose it's a matter of trying it out and playing with it as to trying to see if it does benefit you or not. But one thing that I'm a very big advocate of is keep it simple, keep it clean. I think natural is best, and the less you can depend on supplements and the less you can depend on anything but natural food sources, the better off you'll be from a health perspective. There's just too many nutrients out there that guys abuse and utilize too much, and I think over many years, I'm sure that it does cause some sort of a negative impact on the body, and so you should keep it to a very bare minimum, and try and utilize things that are as natural as possible. I suppose that's why I try to water train as much as possible, and trying to even though I sit and manufacture a carbohydrate drink, I don't consume it that often. The tub can last me a very long time. It really depends on, you know, I use it for specific training purposes. I don't necessarily need to take it in consistently. I don't abuse the products by any means. I've got one more question here. As someone that never drinks coffee and does not enjoy the taste, do you have any suggestions as to other forms of caffeine? Well, definitely. You can buy caffeine in raw form from a pharmacy, and you can just pop it into a bowl of oats and eat it. That's one thing. Or caffeine tablets is another way of getting caffeine into the system. Strong green teas have also got quite a high level of caffeine in. Normal tea's got a high level of caffeine in as well. So it really depends on there's various ways of taking caffeine, but there are a lot of athletes out there that don't like coffee either, and I can't say, like as Dylan mentioned, I very rarely do cyclists not like coffee, but you can get caffeine in its raw form, and that's something that can be taken as well. Okay, have you guys got any other questions at all? Okay, I can't see any other questions really showing. All right, so I'm not going to keep you on for very much longer. I hope it's been informative. If you guys did find the session informative, please email us at info@32gr.com. Let us know if you're interested in more of these sessions going forwards, because like I said, we're really planning on, doing a lot more webinars. What's nice about a webinar is that you don't have to go to a hall or a conference facility and actually sit there. You can actually listen to it in your own home, and you can ask questions, and you can bring the people in and get all the feedback and the information that you need on the internet, which is nice. It's in the comfort of your own home. So it just makes it far more convenient, and we can cater for a larger amount of people at a time. So just let us know what you think or what your thoughts were. We're very interested to get any feedback from you guys if you can email us. Dylan, thank you very much for attending. Guys, if you're wondering where Sean was, unfortunately, South African internet or bandwidth is just he was really battling with his internet, and he actually sent me so many messages apologizing, and I said to him, look, you know what, we're in South Africa. Unfortunately, in some areas the bandwidth is terrible. He tried by a few laptops, a few mobile phones, and he just couldn't connect in the end, so unfortunately he couldn't join us, but we'll make sure that he does come onto another session at some other stage. So just thank you very much to Dylan. And also thank you to Team Westvaal BMC. We've been sponsoring the team for, I think it's 3 years now, and it's actually an awesome team, nice guys, and we really enjoy the relationship. So we appreciate them coming and helping us at times like this. Thanks a lot, Dylan.
It's a pleasure, Mark. Thanks very much for having us. It's also a pity Sean wasn't here. And thanks for a great product. I mean, with your knowledge and this great product, it definitely does help us in going forward. So thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to end off now. Just by the way, there are some awesome new products coming down the line, so stay tuned for that. There's a lot that's going to be happening with 32GR in 2014, and we don't stop developing, so stay tuned, and you'll be seeing some news, I'm sure, shortly. But just thank you very much for all attending, and we will let you know when the next webinar happens. We actually got quite a few coming up, so and if there's any webinars that you guys would like us to do, then send us your ideas. We're pretty happy to do it, and we can always bring on the different professionals from from all different walks of life and different backgrounds to come and actually talk about their experiences as well. So I'm going to stop now, and thanks very much, and have a good evening. Thank you.
Cheers, Mark.